They thought it was just a joke, egging an old trailer on the edge of town, but they didn't know who lived inside. Retired Staff Sergeant Vincent Moore didn't flinch when the first egg hit. He didn't need to, because watching from the shadows was Shadow, his silent, retired canine partner trained for war. Not warning, what started as a prank uncovered secrets, shook a town, and revealed just how far some kids were willing to go. And how ready Vincent still was. What did they leave behind? And why did even the sheriff walk away? This isn't just about a dog or a trailer. It's about what happens when you push the wrong man too far. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The first sound was soft, almost dismissible, a wet splatter against aluminum. In any other context, it might have been mistaken for the early drop of rain or a bird brushing past the trailer. But Vincent Moore had spent too many years reading the subtle cues of the world to misinterpret it. He didn't move, not right away. His hand rested on the armrest of his faded recliner, worn in all the places where time had settled. The glow of the muted television danced across the walls of the small trailer, but Vincent wasn't watching it. His eyes were on the window. Shadow, his aging Belgian Malinois, raised her head slightly from her bed in the corner. She didn't bark, just stared at the same window. Vincent's eyes narrowed. Another splatter followed. This one louder, messier, sliding downward, with the sound of egg yolk trailing over aluminum siding. Vincent let out a long breath through his nose. He reached to the side table, not for a weapon, but for the flashlight he always kept beside the old radio. He didn't flick it on, just held it loosely, letting the weight settle into his hand. Shadow was already on her feet, silent, ears perked. She moved to the door but stopped just short of it, waiting. He stood slowly. The arthritis in his right knee announced itself like it always did, but he moved with practiced quiet. He didn't turn on the porch light. Instead, he eased up the blind with 2 fingers and peered into the dark. Nothing visible, not yet. The third egg came in fast, shattering across the narrow kitchen window with a sharp crack. This time, the shell chipped the edge. Vincent flinched, not from surprise, but calculation. That angle meant someone had crept around the fence. He lowered the blind and stepped away. Shadow moved beside him like a shadow herself, her body tense but disciplined. She didn't need commands. Years ago in Afghanistan, one sharp whistle could send her into motion. But those days were behind them, mostly. Now she watched Vincent the way soldiers watch field commanders. Patiently, alertly, he moved toward the back of the trailer, quiet, measured. A glance at the locked cabinet by the rear exit. He didn't open it. Not yet. Vincent opened the back door just a crack, letting in the cold evening air. The sharp smell of egg drifted in, sour, familiar, juvenile. But beneath it, there was something else. Cheap cologne, cigarette smoke. Dirt kicked up from the path beside the fence. He'd walked that ground enough times to know how it smelled clean. This wasn't clean. He stepped onto the back step. No porch lights, just the moonlight spreading over the fields beyond. He stood there in the quiet, his flashlight still off, and waited somewhere in the dark. Laughter erupted, faint, teenage, too far to chase now. Tires squealed on asphalt. A car pulled off fast from the gravel shoulder. He listened, memorizing the engine. Tone, 4-cylinder, muffled, not stock, likely local. He turned and stepped back inside. Shadow followed, still silent. Inside, Vincent moved to the sink and ran warm water. He grabbed a towel from the rack and opened the door again. The splattered egg across the siding had already begun to dry. He wiped it down slowly, methodically, like a ritual. The white residue smeared, then lifted, leaving behind dull streaks. A thin crack in the window glass traced outward from the third hit small, but there, he tossed the towel into the laundry bin and sat back down. Not in his recliner this time, at the small kitchen table. He opened the drawer beside him and pulled out a notebook, not the kind used for groceries or casual notes. This one had grid paper, labeled tabs, inked headings. He wrote the date, time, impact, angle, sounds, estimated group count 2 to 3, vehicle make, unknown, possibly compact. Then he circled a word on the page from an earlier entry written months ago after his truck had been keyed in. The parking lot outside the gas station, pattern. Shadow lay down at his feet. The low creak of her settling into position was the only sound in the room. Vincent didn't get angry. He didn't call the sheriff. He'd done that before when someone had thrown trash at the trailer door last summer. Nothing had come of it. Just kids, they said. He didn't argue then. He didn't need to now. Instead, he flipped to the next blank page and began a new entry. Phase 1, provocation. The phone rang just after 7 o'clock the next morning. Vincent had already been up for an hour. He was outside, kneeling by the eastern edge of the trailer, studying the dirt patch beneath the window. Shadow stood a few feet behind him, still and quiet. The call came through the old flip phone he kept clipped to the kitchen wall. He let it ring twice before standing up, brushing off his hands on the back of his jeans, and stepping inside. He answered without much inflection. On the other end, then a voice hesitant but familiar. "Vince, it's Kara next door, Kara Whitman." He didn't reply right away, but she took that as permission to continue. "Listen, I think I owe you an apology," she said, her voice tight with discomfort. "My son and his friends were out late last night, and, well, I found egg. Cartons in the trash this morning, broken shells. I don't know for sure if they did it, but..." Her voice trailed off. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry if they caused any trouble." Vincent looked out the window toward her house. Small ranch-style light blue paint faded under the sun. Her boy, Derek, maybe 15, had always seemed polite enough in the rare moments they crossed paths. Rode a bike with pegs on the back, wore those oversized hoodies in summer. The kind of kid who barely looked up when you waved. "I appreciate the call," Vincent said, his voice even. She added quickly, "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. He knows better." Vincent nodded, though she couldn't see him. All right, she hesitated a second longer, maybe expecting more, maybe hoping he'd offer reassurance that it wasn't a big deal, but he didn't. "Okay, well, sorry again," she said, then ended the call. He hung up the phone and stepped back outside. The morning air was still cold, and dew clung to the grass like sweat on fatigues. He moved slowly, scanning the narrow strip between his trailer and the line of trees behind it. His boots didn't make a sound, the same way they didn't on retcon patrols back, when silence meant the difference between getting home or not. The grass was flattened in a curved pattern like someone had crouched there. A partial tread from a skate shoe was pressed into the soil, close to the base of his propane tank. Another faint mark, wider, suggested someone had braced their foot. To throw, he followed the trail a few feet before it disappeared into the thicker brush. He stood still for a long moment, no anger, just calculation. If it had been Derek, he didn't act alone. He glanced back toward the house next door. Kara's blinds were still drawn. A dog barked 2 streets over, but otherwise the neighborhood was still waking up. Back inside, Vincent opened the metal lockbox beneath the bench seat near the front window. Inside were a few tools, a coil of paracord, and a compact digital trail camera. Not military issue, but close. He'd picked it up at a surplus store a year ago, half out of habit, half out of instinct. He checked the battery. Full memory card still clean. He set it aside. Shadow followed him as he stepped out again, this time toward the side fence. There was an old tree near the corner of the lot, gnarled and leaning but sturdy. From that angle, he'd get a full view of the east side of the trailer, where the eggs had hit, and the fence line beyond. He mounted the camera quietly, adjusting the tilt until the lens faced the right direction. It wasn't paranoia, not yet, but it wasn't nothing either. Back inside, he wiped his boots, then brewed coffee. Shadow sat at attention near the window, watching the street with practiced stillness. He didn't write anything down this time, no new entry in the notebook, but he did flip back to the previous page where he'd circled the word pattern. The night before, he drew a line beneath it, then another. By late afternoon, Vincent had already finished fixing the cracked kitchen window. The damage hadn't been much a surface fracture near the corner of the glass, but he knew better than to leave any weakness exposed. It was the kind of thing you dealt with quickly, quietly, the way he'd done repairs on field equipment overseas. A little epoxy, a strip of clear tape for the outer seal, and a firm press. Done. Shadow watched from her usual place by the front door. She hadn't moved much all day, but her ears twitched with every car that passed. Vincent had learned to read those subtle changes in her posture, the shift of attention. She hadn't let her guard down, not since the night before, just as he Sat back down with a black coffee and the county newspaper. His phone vibrated on the table. Not a call, a text. Rare enough that it caught his attention. The name on the screen read, Miller Town Hall. Brian Miller worked maintenance for the town, a former Navy corpsman who now fixed plumbing and patched drywall in municipal buildings. Vincent opened the message. No greeting, just a single link and a short sentence. Thought you should see this. It opened to a short video, less than 20 seconds. Grainy footage, shot at night. Streetlights barely lit the edges, but the subjects were clear enough. 3 teens, faces partially visible, crouching near the side of a trailer. One held a carton of eggs, another was mid-throw, and the third was filming. The egg exploded against the siding. The same sound Vincent had heard 12 hours earlier. Off camera, a voice laughed high-pitched and nasal. Old guy didn't even come out. What a loser. More laughter followed, then a second egg hit. This time splattering higher on the window. Bet he's sleeping with his dog or something, another voice added, wheezing between giggles. The clip cut off with a shaky pan toward a vehicle. A sedan where the license plate was just barely visible under a dim STREETLIGHT. Vincent watched it twice. Not out of emotion, not for anger. He was listening, timing the throws, mapping the layout, estimating their angle of approach. It was second nature. He could almost picture the distance from the fence line, the way the kid shifted his weight before each toss, the phone. Not a perfect view, but enough to place him. He'd seen that mop of curly blonde hair before outside the corner store, hanging around the ice freezer with a half-empty energy drink in hand, always laughing too loud, always with a group, the kind of kid who looked through you, not at you. Vincent set the phone down slowly. He didn't need to show anyone the video. It was already circulating. If Miller had it, half the town's teenagers had seen it by now. And if it kept bouncing around local chats, it would reach parents eventually. Maybe even Kara. Maybe she'd recognize the voice, or the laugh. Maybe she already had. He stood and looked out the window. The sun was low now, and the town had that late-day hush. Lawn, mowers going silent. Porch lights starting to flicker on. 2 boys pedaled past on bikes, not the same ones. But Vincent watched them anyway, studying how their eyes didn't look at his trailer. Inside, Shadow gave a soft grunt and shifted. She sensed it too, that change in the air. The tightening. Vincent didn't feel embarrassed, he didn't feel wronged. What he felt was a cold, familiar clarity. That line between mischief and warning had been crossed, not just because of the eggs or the video, but because they felt so sure nothing would happen. In return, because one of them had looked directly into the camera and laughed. Because they thought the man in the trailer had grown too old, too slow, too detached to notice. He moved back to the kitchen, slid open the drawer, and removed the SD card from the trail camera he'd installed that morning. He walked it to the old laptop on the shelf and slid it in without a word. Sometimes people talked too much, and sometimes the quiet ones already knew what came next. The trailer had always drawn attention, not the kind people gave openly, but the kind that settled in whispers and sideways glances. Parked at the edge of Maple Hollow, just past the tree line where the town's modest grid gave way to wide pasture and disused fencing, it looked out of place, too weathered for charm, too old for irony, and too quiet for comfort. Made of dull, corrugated aluminum, it reflected just enough light to stand out at dusk, but not enough to shine. It didn't seem like a home, exactly. More like a question no one wanted to ask. People had theories. That thing should have been condemned years ago. Someone muttered once at the gas station, half watching it through a side mirror. "It's probably off the books," said another, nodding with a kind of vague suspicion. No way it passed a permit check. Even the town's kids had nicknames for it. The Rust Box, the Shrapnel Shed, Haunted Hollow. They whispered stories of an old man who never turned on the lights, who walked a dog that didn't bark, who never spoke unless spoken to. Some said the inside was filled with radios and maps. Others swore they saw red lights blinking through the curtains late at night, but mostly they didn't go near it. The truth, of course, didn't interest most people. But it was simple. Vincent Moore had moved into the trailer 5 years earlier, after selling a small ranch property west of Hill County. It had been too much land, too far from the VA hospital, too full of things he no longer needed. The trailer, by contrast, offered him exactly what he wanted: solitude, proximity to town, and a boundary he could control. It had come cheap. He paid cash. He told no one where he came from unless asked, and even then, he only offered what was necessary. No one knew that before he parked that trailer at the edge of town. He had spent 22 years in the Army. Fewer still knew that. 14 of those were in reconnaissance units, first in Iraq, then in Afghanistan. They didn't know about the 6-man team he led into the mountains outside Kandahar. They didn't know what it meant to spend nights watching targets from caves, marking convoy routes with lasers, calling in air support at 2 a.m. while half his team was running on adrenaline and heat rations. And they certainly didn't know that the dog now sleeping at his feet had once dragged a wounded Marine out of an IED blast zone under enemy fire. What they saw was an aging man with a limp and a scar running along his neck. Living in a place most wouldn't spend the night in, Vincent never corrected their assumptions. He didn't attend town events. He paid for his groceries in cash. When he needed parts for the trailer's plumbing, he drove 40 miles to the next county over. He'd learned long ago that people feared what they couldn't label, and that fear in small towns turns quickly to resentment. What kept him there wasn't the trailer or the land or even the quiet. It was the distance. From noise, from old command calls, from the names of men he could still recite but hadn't heard from in years. Shadow understood that too. The dog had aged into civilian life with a dignity most humans didn't manage. She didn't chase things, didn't bark at cars, but she never let her guard down either. Some of the town's officials had raised questions when he first arrived, permitting septic lines, whether a structure like that was appropriate, but every time it came up, the mayor quietly stepped in. No one knew why. Some assumed a favor. Others suspected he had something on her. In reality, Mayor Ellen Clark had received a letter. The week Vincent moved, in and signed, but typed, confirming his honorable discharge and referencing commendations she wasn't cleared to access. She filed it without comment, so the trailer stayed. And when someone new asked about it at the diner or over drinks, they were usually told the same thing. Don't worry about the guy out there. He keeps to himself. But over time, worry started. To shift into unease, the trailer was to still its occupant to unreadable, and in a place like Maple Hollow, where everyone was used to familiar rhythms and open blinds, something that didn't belong drew more attention than most would admit. That's why. When the video of the egging went around, a few people laughed, but others watched in silence, uneasy, because even if they didn't know the man in the trailer, they knew one thing for sure. He hadn't come out yet, but he would. Shadow's ears moved long before her body did. A flick to the left, then forward, then still. She remained in the dim glow of the living room, nestled against the wall just below the window, where the curtain didn't quite reach the floor. Outside, the crunch of gravel under sneakers had broken the quiet, but she made no sound, no growl, no bark. Just breath steady, ears attentive, eyes fixed on the direction of the noise. Most dogs would have responded. A sharp bark, a rise to their feet, the thump of paws against the floor as they ran to the window. But Shadow was different. Her training had carved those instincts down to something else, refined them, tempered them. Alert didn't mean loud. Reaction didn't mean movement. Vincent didn't even glance over. He already knew. He could feel it too, that shift in her tension, the way her weight pressed slightly against the floor as she adjusted for balance. The kind of posture he remembered from the forward bases, where stillness wasn't laziness sit, was the moment before everything changed. Shadow had been his second partner in Afghanistan. The first had been hit by shrapnel during a mission outside Bagram. The memory still lived in Vincent's muscle memory, the way they'd loaded the stretcher, the way the heat had hung in the air like a curtain. He hadn't planned to accept a second dog. But Shadow wasn't just any dog. She was already trained, already proven. They'd brought her in as part of a pilot program, enhanced scent tracking, extended field commands, remote response conditioning. She was the only one who didn't flinch when mortar fire cracked in the distance, the only one who could clear a building and return to heal with no more than a silent hand gesture. And more than once, she'd detected something Vincent hadn't. Before, it became a headline. Before it was too late now, in the quiet of the trailer, she moved slightly, just enough to position herself behind the curtain. one eye on the lawn, the other on Vincent. Outside, laughter carried down the road. Teenagers, 3 voices, maybe 4. One kicked something a can, most likely down the gravel shoulder. The noise echoed a bit off the side of the trailer. Shadow's lip twitched, almost imperceptibly. Still no sound. She had been trained for more than a dozen commands, most of them issued without a word. Finger taps, glances, the slow rise of a fist. She knew what watch meant. She knew how to calculate risk the way only military dogs did, not by emotion, but by context. Vincent, seated at the small table, took a slow sip of coffee. His eyes didn't leave the window either. He trusted Shadow more than he trusted most people, especially now. The voices outside faded slightly as the group moved farther down the road. One boy shouted something crude, unintelligible in the distance. Followed by a burst of laughter. A car door slammed. Tires spun loose gravel. Then stillness again. Only then did Shadow exhale through her nose and rest her head against her paws. Her body relaxed incrementally, but her ears didn't lie flat. Not yet. Vincent reached down without looking and gave her shoulder a slow, firm press. No words, just contact. She had stopped barking years ago. Not because she couldn't, but because she'd learned not to. Her silence wasn't fear. It was readiness, the kind of silence that warned more than noise ever could. Vincent stood, walked to the window, and lifted the edge of the curtain. The tire tracks from the previous night were still visible, overlapping now with a fresh set. Slightly narrower tread. Not the same car. He didn't say anything. Just let the curtain fall back into place. Shadow rose and padded to the front door, sitting quietly beside it, not asking to be let out, not whining, just present. Ready. Outside, the town moved on like it always did. Engines starting, leaves rustling, a lawnmower 3 blocks away, but inside the trailer, the air was still. The dog didn't bark. She didn't have to. Vincent's day always began the same way. At 5:45 sharp, the alarm went off, an old digital clock with red numbers that cast a faint glow over the trailer walls. He never hit snooze. There was no need. He was usually awake a few minutes before. It rang anyway, lying on his back, hands crossed on his chest, listening to the quiet click of shadows breathing and the creak of the walls settling with the morning. Temperature shift. By 5:50, the boots were on, laced tightly, not hurried. His hands moved through the motions the same way they had on base years ago. The same knot, the same double check of the tongue, the same bend at the knee to test the tension. Shadow rose when he did, stretching long and slow, her back arching slightly as she shook off sleep. No leash was needed. They walked as a pair. Outside, the gravel path crunched softly beneath his steps. The cold morning air always sharpened his focus. There was a silence in Maple Hollow that reminded him of the pre-dawn quiet before deployment patrols. The streets empty, the mailboxes still unopened, lights off in every house. The world paused. They followed the same loop each morning. Down. The narrow trail that skirted the edge of the tree line past the rusted utility pole that tilted 4 degrees south. Over to the drainage ditch that collected runoff when it rained. Vincent noticed everything. Which branches had fallen, which tire tracks were new, the way the grass leaned. Nothing ever escaped him, though most of it never required action. It wasn't about reacting, it was about knowing. Shadow padded silently beside him, her paws precise, even on uneven ground. She sniffed at the same tree near the bend, not distracted Jess, confirming the two of them moved without speaking, without hesitation. They didn't need conversation to share understanding. By 6:30, they were back. Shadow took her place on the small rug by the back door, tail thumping once as Vincent passed into the kitchen. 2 eggs, over medium, toast dry, never buttered. The eggs he cracked with care, checking the yolks as they hit the pan. The toast went in just after, so the timing matched. 4 minutes total. He had measured it out once with a stopwatch and never changed it again. He plated the food without ceremony. 1 egg on each slice. Forks set parallel on the right. He sat at the narrow table that faced the window, the curtain still halfway drawn, letting in the amber light of sunrise. He ate slowly, not out of reverence or thoughtfulness, just routine. After breakfast came the scanned. Vincent stalked outside with his coffee in hand and walked the perimeter of the trailer. He checked the fence posts, not just that they were upright, but whether they had shifted in the soft earth. He paused near the propane tank to make sure the line seals hadn't been disturbed. Then he circled around the tree where he'd mounted the trail camera and glanced up, checking its position. The memory card wouldn't be reviewed until nightfall, but he liked confirming it hadn't been tampered with by the time the rest of the town was starting to stir. Garage doors opening, engines turning over, porch lights flicking off. Vincent was back inside. The dishes were rinsed, the eggshells discarded, the coffee drained. This was how he kept himself grounded. Some people needed conversation, others needed medication. Vincent needed structure. Each movement built on the one before it, each hour shaped by the decisions of the last. He hadn't always been this way, not before the military, not even in the first few years after discharge. But things had shifted gradually. Sleep had become lighter, noise more intrusive, peace something that required effort. Order had become the only way to keep the noise from creeping back in. Shadow, too, had adopted the rhythm. She knew when breakfast ended. She knew when to return to her spot near the front door. She knew that at 0700, Vincent would sit down to read, and that at 0830, he'd clean the rifle whether it had been used or not. To outsiders, it looked obsessive. To Vincent, it was survival, and as the sun rose fully over Maple Hollow, casting long shadows from the edge of the trailer into the gravel beyond, Vincent sat back at his table and began flipping through the small notebook he kept near the window, one finger resting on yesterday's entry. Nothing out of place this morning, but that never meant nothing was coming. Vincent didn't check the mailbox every morning. He had no reason to. The bills came electronically now, and he hadn't received a letter from anyone he knew in more than a year. Most of what did show up was addressed to resident or stuffed with coupons from chain stores in nearby counties. But that morning, Shadow stopped short before they reached the turn in their walk. She wasn't tense, not exactly more curious. Her head angled toward the rusted box that leaned slightly over the gravel shoulder. She sniffed once, then again, and then sat, still and deliberate. Vincent's eyes narrowed. He adjusted the grip on his thermos and walked toward the mailbox. There was no breeze, but something felt off. He opened the dented door and found a single piece of folded notebook paper resting inside. No envelope, no stamp. Just creased down the middle and wedged between the thin metal walls like someone had pushed it in and walked away. He took it out slowly. The paper was still warm from the morning sun. Its blue lines faded like it had been torn from the middle. Of a school binder, there were no markings on the outside. No name, no signature. Just the weight of someone's intent folded into a few quick bends. He opened it. 4 words, written in thick black marker, all caps. "Move out, old freak." Vincent read it once. Then again. The lettering was rushed, slanted slightly to the right. The marker had bled through the page in places, revealing pressure points where the writer had pushed too hard. He ran a thumb over the surface, noting the indentation left by the tip. Not a printed note, not something planned days in advance. Sloppy, emotional. Recent. He looked toward the road. Tire tracks from the mail carrier were still visible, layered. Under a second set in a row of wheels, likely a bike or a small car, the distance between the tire marks suggested a hasty stop. He didn't react visibly. Instead, he folded the paper in half and tucked it inside his coat pocket. Then he turned and looked at Shadow. She was watching him, unimoving. They continued the walk as if nothing had happened. Back at the trailer, Vincent rinsed Shadow's paws as he always did. Mud had gathered near the fence line from last night's dew, and she stepped lightly through it. He dried her off with the same old towel hanging on the peg by the door and poured her a fresh bowl of water before he sat down. He took out the note again, flattening it carefully on the table. The words stared back at him with adolescent anger. No context, no demand, just hostility laid bare. He didn't need to guess where it came from. It wasn't subtle. The egging, the video, the laughter. It wasn't a one-time prank. It was the beginning of something more deliberate. A group emboldened by their own certainty that nothing would happen to them. That the man in the trailer was alone, out of touch, irrelevant. That no one would come to his defense. That no one would care. Vincent opened his notebook and wrote down the time he'd found the note, the condition of the paper, the handwriting style. He noted the mailbox door's position, the tire tracks, the sequence of events before and after. He didn't speculate. He just recorded. He slipped the note into a plastic sleeve and placed it in the back of the binder, behind older pages that documented other things, some mundane, some not. It was all the same to him. Information, behavior, patterns. Shadow sat nearby, her body angled toward the front window. Not anxious, not worried, just alert. Vincent poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and sat in the chair nearest the door. He didn't call anyone, didn't report it. The sheriff had already shown what he thought of eggs and laughter. This was something else. A message, yes, but not the kind that needed a response. Not yet. For now, Vincent waited because whoever left the note had done so believing they had power, and that belief, more than the message itself, was what made them dangerous. The knock on the trailer door came just after 11 a.m., a firm, measured rhythm, not hurried, not tentative. 3 short raps, followed by a pause. Shadow lifted her head before the first knock had even finished. She didn't rise, but her eyes locked on the door and her ears tilted slightly forward. Vincent set down his coffee and moved to the window. He pulled the curtain aside a sliver and didn't need more than a glance. The sedan parked just off the gravel shoulder wasn't a patrol car, but it was government issue, Maple Hollow Municipal Services. Standing in front of the door was Ellen Clark-Mayer Clark II. Most, though she rarely used the title unless required, she wore a gray blazer over dark jeans and a clipboard was tucked under her arm. She wasn't looking at the door. She was looking off toward the edge of the field that bordered Vincent's property, as if admiring the fall grass or measuring something unseen. Vincent opened the door halfway. He didn't greet her, and she didn't flinch. "Morning, Vincent," she said evenly, still not quite facing him. "Mind if I come up for a minute? Got a few things I need to go over?" He stepped aside, no word spoken. She took that as a yes. Shadow remained in her place near the table, watching but unmoving. Ellen noticed her immediately. "She's still got that presence about her," she said softly. Vincent nodded. "She hasn't lost a step." The mayor offered a faint smile, then perched on the small bench built into the wall beneath the front window. She didn't remove her blazer, didn't set down the clipboard, just sat and let the silence fill the room a moment. Vincent waited. "Supposed to be here about utility assessments," she said finally, glancing toward the clipboard. "Quarterly inspection of access points and any non-standard hookups." Vincent said nothing. They both knew that wasn't the real reason she was there. His trailer had been grandfathered in under a quiet exception she herself had signed off. On years earlier, no one had inspected his access points since the day he moved in. "But that's not really why I came," she continued, turning now to face him fully. "There's been some chatter online around town. I figured I'd stop by, get ahead of it, see if there's anything I should be aware of." Vincent crossed his arms but didn't answer. "I saw the video," she added. "The egging, the laughing." He finally spoke. "Then you know what kind of town you're running." Ellen's expression didn't change. "I know this town better than most. I also know some of the people raising these boys have forgotten what discipline looks like." Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what do you want from me?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "Not yet. But if this it's starting to look like it might need to be able to say, 'I did my part to keep things contained.'" He said nothing, but his silence didn't unsettle her. "Look, Vincent," she said, voice lower now. "I don't pretend to know everything about your time overseas. Your record's sealed, and I've never asked for the clearance to read what's not meant for me, but I know enough." He raised an eyebrow. "Barely. I know who signed your reassignment letters. I know which ribbons showed up in your file before they were redacted. And I know that dog isn't here because you liked the idea of companionship." At that, Shadow finally shifted her head, lifting just a little higher. "I know you didn't come to Maple Hollow to get involved," Ellen continued, "and I'm not here to ask you to start now, but I need you to understand something. If this turns into a real incident, if someone gets hurt or something burns down, there are going to be cameras, there's going to be blame, and your name's going to come up whether or not you say a word." Vincent's voice was flat. "So you're here to warn me?" She shook her head. "I'm here to remind you that this place might not be the sanctuary you thought it would be. It's still a small town. People talk, they assume, and when something breaks, they look for the nearest explanation." She stood, adjusting her blazer. "I don't know who left that note in your mailbox, but I do know this. There are kids in this town who've been taught that consequences don't exist, and I know what happens when they meet someone who is trained never to flinch. She gave one last glance toward Shadow, then the door. "Take care of yourself, Vincent." She didn't wait for a reply. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, and her car pulled away slowly, leaving only the faint smell of dust and exhaust. Inside, Vincent returned to his chair. Shadow settled once more, but her eyes stayed on the door long after the mayor was gone. The sheriff's office was tucked between the post office and the bait shop. Vehicle the year he moved to Maple Hollow, he preferred to stay off the grid, off the radar, and out of places like this. But after 3 days of escalating Signs-Egg's threats, a barely veiled warning from the mayor, he decided to cross the street and walk through the front door. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. A small bell above the door rang as he entered. At the front desk sat a deputy who looked barely old enough to shave, hunched over a desktop computer, typing with 2 fingers. He looked up, startled. Morning, sir. Can I help you?" "I'm here to speak with Sheriff Kenley." The deputy paused. "He's in the back. But, do you have an appointment? Or—" Vincent didn't answer, just stood still. 2 minutes later, Sheriff Dean Kenley pushed open the back door of the office with the slow gait of someone who didn't like being interrupted. He had a badge, a clipboard tucked under one arm. "Didn't waste time. Someone's been vandalizing my property. 3 nights in a row, eggs, firecrackers, notes in the mailbox. I want it on record." Kenley scratched the back of his neck. "We heard about the eggs," he said, his tone already drifting toward casual. Boys being boys. His expression didn't change. Kenley motioned him toward a side room, more private. Inside was a mismatched table and 2 plastic chairs. Vincent sat. Shadow, who had followed at his heel, remained just outside the doorframe, waiting. "So," Kenley said, settling into the chair across from him, "tell me what happened, and I'll take a statement." Vincent laid it out clearly. The date and time of each incident, the evidence, the note, the video going around town, the tire tracks, even the makeshift incendiary they'd nearly lit behind the propane tank. Kenley listened, nodding now and then, but his body language didn't change much. No urgency, no surprise. He clicked his pen once, then set it down. When Vincent finished, Kenley leaned back and let out a long breath through his nose. "I'm gonna be straight with you," he said finally. "This sounds like a group of dumb kids, probably high school. We're not talking about real damage here." Vincent's gaze didn't waver. "They're escalating." Kenley shrugged. Maybe not, but unless someone gets hurt or property damage hits a certain threshold, it's not worth pressing charges. It's a lot of paperwork, and most of the time the parents get a slap on the wrist, and the kids walk. "I'm not asking for arrests," Vincent said. "I want a record, a report." Kenley tapped his pen against the table once. "Sure, I can do that, but I'll be honest with you. More of this kind of thing. It's better to let it die down. Don't engage. Let M get bored." Then he stood. "I know the law doesn't act until after," he said, voice even, "but you've been warned. Let the system do its job." Vincent stepped out of the room without another word. His trailer, he didn't feel reassured. He felt confirmed. The night was still. No breeze. No distant hum of cars on the county road. Just the quiet chirp of insects layered against the low buzz of the porch light. Inside the trailer, Vincent sat at the small table near the front window, sorting through the older files he kept boxed beneath the bench seat. Not military records, those were locked up tighter than anything in town, but personal copies, notes, maps, names, scanned photographs. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, not exactly. Maybe just something that made sense of the shift. In air over the last few days, Shadow lay near the window, eyes half-lidded but ears twitching every few seconds. She had slept off and on most of the evening, content in the rhythm of Vincent's quiet movements. But now, as the hour edged toward midnight, something changed. It started with a sound light, almost out of place. Not a footstep, not a branch. Snapping. A laugh, short, sharp, and too close. Shadow's head lifted instantly. Her body followed. No bark, no growl. At first, just a sudden stillness that sucked the air from the room. She moved to the curtain, body low, and stared through the narrow gap. Vincent had already stilled. His hand hovered for a moment over the table, then reached to the drawer beside it. Not for a weapon, for the flashlight. He didn't turn it on, not yet. Then came the growl. It was low, from deep in shadows, chest barely audible to anyone else but unmistakable to Vincent. It wasn't fear. It wasn't excitement. It was the kind of growl she had used during silent approach missions. The kind that meant, "I see them." Vincent stood quietly and moved to her side. He parted the curtain, just enough to see. The light from the porch spilled across the first few feet of gravel, but beyond that, shadows overtook the tree line. Something had moved. Not fast, not clumsy, but not careful either. The laugh repeated. This time, it was farther off, coming from behind the edge of the fence. Teenagers, maybe 2 of them, whispering now, one shushing the other. Vincent didn't move toward the door. Instead, he walked to the far side of the trailer, toward the storage cabinet he hadn't opened in years. The key still hung on a small hook behind the kitchen light switch. It took only a second to unlock. Inside were 2 boxes. One held spare parts, pluming couplings, weather sealant, and old transistor radio. The other was labeled only by a strip of duct tape across the top. The ink had faded, but he could still read it. Pre-discharge, 2014. He pulled the box out, set it on the table, and opened it. Shadow sat nearby, but her ears stayed angled toward the window. She hadn't moved, hadn't gone into full alert, but she hadn't relaxed either. Inside the box were things Vincent hadn't looked at in nearly a decade. After-action reports, satellite photos, a field notebook with sand still caught between the pages, and buried underneath, a slim folder marked with a red corner tab. He pulled it out carefully. It wasn't classified anymore, not officially. He had been granted a debrief copy when he left his final post. Most soldiers tossed theirs. Vincent hadn't. The first page listed the names of his final unit. 6 men, 1 dog. One of the men hadn't made it home. 2 others had left the service. Within months, the mission details were brief, vague even. Recon of a suspected supply line in the Tangi Valley. Contact with local fighters, engagement avoided, objectives incomplete. But Vincent remembered what wasn't written down. The way they'd been shadowed, the warnings from the villagers, the way laughter had echoed from the ridgeline. Right before the ambush, it was that same kind of laugh he'd heard tonight. Not mocking, not joyful, confident, testing. He closed the folder slowly and set it aside. His mind wasn't in Afghanistan, not entirely. It was here, Maple Hollow, a place where people left their porch lights on and assumed that meant safety. Again, now she stood by the door, body taut. Waiting. Vincent walked over, turned off the porch light, and stood in the dark with her. He listened to the silence that followed the retreating footsteps. They weren't running. They didn't have to. They thought this was a game. Vincent placed the folder into the center of the table and slid a notepad beside it. On the first line, he wrote down the time, the location of the sound, the type of voice, the pattern of steps. Then he drew a short dash and a single word. Testing. He put the pen down slowly. Shadow returned to her spot, but didn't lie down. Neither of them would sleep that night. The wind had shifted by midnight. Cooler now, coming down off the ridge with a whisper that rustled the brittle leaves clinging to the trees behind Vincent's trailer. Glow of distant porch lights and the pale silver of the moon catching on the frostbitten grass. His steps were slow, measured. Earth. She kept low, head level with her shoulders, ears twitching at every sound. They weren't out for a walk this time. Vincent had something in his hand, an old pelican case, dark green and scuffed with age. Its edges were sealed tight with heavy clasps. The same kind of case used for gear in dust storms and monsoon rains. Back in Afghanistan, these cameras were common. He stored it in the box with his other field equipment, unsure if he'd ever need it again. But after the last few nights, the eggs, the laughter, the note, it didn't feel like paranoia anymore. It felt overdue. He reached the tree line about 30 feet from the rear of the trailer, the same place the tire tracks had disappeared days ago. Window, the propane tank, and the perimeter gate. He knelt beside the tree and brushed away a patch of pine needles with the back of his glove. Opened the case slowly and lifted the camera out. It was the size of a thick paperback, matte black, with a small digital screen and an external motion sensor clipped to the top like a periscope. enough for 2 weeks of footage if set to trigger on motion only. The battery pack, lithium-based, had been charging near the heater for 2 days. It clicked in place with a soft mechanical hum. Vincent positioned the camera at knee height on the trunk, anchoring it with 2 industrial zip ties and a strip of black rubber, toward the trail just beyond the brush. Everything blended into the shadows, no shine, no reflective edges. He took a few steps back, examined the angle, then made a small adjustment to the tilt dot. He didn't speak. He hadn't spoken since leaving. The trailer, Shadow, sat a few yards away, watching him work. Her body language was calm but alert, as if this, too, was a drill she remembered. Once satisfied with the placement, he didn't. Want the flash spooking them? These kids were arrogant, but not stupid. They'd been getting closer, bolder. He needed to let them think no one was watching. Satisfied, he closed the interface and locked the cover shut. The screen went dark. He stood, brushing off his hands. He took a slow look around. Nothing stirred in the tree line. No sound except for a distant dog barking 2 blocks over and the hum of a transformer on a pole near the main road. He walked back toward the trailer. He paused once to check the gate. Latch still secure, no fresh scuff, marks or tampered hinges. Back inside, he removed his boots at the threshold and set the Pelican case on the table. Empty now, but not forgotten. It would stay close. He'd swap the card every 2 days before dawn and catalog the footage the way he used 2 frame by frame. Front window, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The surveillance had begun. Not out of fear, but out of discipline. And if the town was going to keep sleeping through what was building, Vincent wasn't. The noise came at 2:17 a.m. Not loud at first, just a quick pop, like a bottle cap snapping off, then another. Then the unmistakable crack and hiss of a small firework going off far too close to the side wall of the trailer. Shadow was all ready. On her feet, pacing to the front door before Vincent had even sat up, he reached for his boots. No hesitation, no wasted movements. The room was dark, save for the dim glow of the motion sensor clock on the kitchen counter. By the time he opened the door, Shadow was already out, moving low and fast toward the corner of the trailer where the sound had come from. He didn't call out. He stepped out into the cold with his flashlight in one hand and the other tucked inside his jacket. The air smelled of sulfur and burned paper. A faint wisp of smoke drifted across the grass, glowing softly in the half-moon. Light. The scene was clearer the closer he got. Shaving cream sprayed across the trailer's aluminum siding in looping, chaotic spirals. Someone had smeared it across the windows too, obscuring the view inside. The firecracker had exploded near a pile of garbage fast food bags, crushed cans, and something that looked like a torn sweatshirt sleeve all dumped at the edge of the propane tank, sloppy, rushed, but not harmless. Shadow stopped near the base of the trailer steps, nose pressed to the ground. She sniffed once, then moved in a slow, tightening circle. Her body stiffened near the base of the water spigot, and she paused. Staring down, Vincent moved to her side and looked where she was focused. A lighter, small, blue plastic, dirt scuffed. On one side, he crouched and picked it up carefully. It was warm, freshly dropped. The cheap kind sold in gas station displays near the register, but it was what was on it that made his stomach twist. A smear of something oily, pomade maybe, or scented gel clung to the edge. Familiar, he lifted it to his nose and inhaled. Vanilla, with a strange synthetic edge. He didn't need to think long. That scent lived in locker rooms and gym bags, the kind of fragrance teens drenched themselves in before parties. Under the false belief that it masked sweat or smoke or nerves, he'd smelled it last week in Townen, a group of kids outside. The pharmacy. One had bumped into him. No apology, just a glance, a smirk, and the lingering cloud of too sweet cologne. Vincent's grip tightened around the lighter. He didn't know the boy's name, but he knew the shape of his shoulders, the gait, the tone of his laugh. He had already begun recording timestamps of every encounter. Quiet observations logged without context until now. He slipped the lighter into a small evidence bag from his drawer back inside. The plastic crinkled as he sealed it. Shadow hadn't moved. She remained stationed at the edge of the trash pile, eyes locked toward the fence line as if expecting them to return. Vincent took a slow lap around the perimeter. No fresh tire tracks this time, just the prints of 2 sneakers, shallow tread circling around the edge and back out toward the road. He photographed them both, then checked the night vision camera, still operational. The red light blinked slowly, undisturbed back inside. He logged the new incident in his notebook: date, time, materials used, behavior patterns. He added a short note in the margin: escalation confirmed. Targeting critical infrastructure. Fuel source. He paused before writing the next sentence. Then, slowly, in smaller print than usual, scented marker match, vanilla. Synthetic. Subject likely repeat offender from pharmacy group. Visual cross-reference pending. He closed the notebook. This wasn't a prank anymore. This was a test to see how far they could go, how long they could provoke without pushback. Vincent wasn't scared, but he wasn't indifferent either. Shadow returned to her place by the door, lying down with her head between her paws. Her ears still twitched every few seconds. Vincent sat in the armchair by the window and waited for dawn. Not because he expected more that night, but because the pattern had changed, and the message had too. Vincent wasn't fond of screens. He preferred paper tangible, permanent, something you could fold and file. But there were times when the digital world offered shortcuts that experience alone couldn't replicate. That morning, after cataloging the second incident, he opened his old laptop, the one with the cracked edge near the charging port and the sluggish processor that wheezed when running more than 2 tabs. He connected to the public Wi-Fi from the community center 3 blocks away. He'd never signed up for a social account, but he knew how to find things. Names, photos, connections, they floated. Just beneath the surface for anyone who knew where to look, the search began with a post from the previous week. Someone had tagged a short clip with the words "trailer hit, lol." It had been taken down already, but not before a dozen people had shared it. Laughed at it, reacted to it with flame emojis and hearts. Screenshots remained comments. Vincent followed. The thread, each username became a clue. Most were kids, students from the local high school or the neighboring vocational program. Vincent clicked through their profiles one by one, noting patterns in who liked what, who commented on which photos, and how often they interacted. There was no need for full names yet. He wanted rhythm, consistency, repetition. Then he found it, a group selfie taken behind the bleachers at Maple Hollow High. For boys grinning. One wore a red varsity jacket, the kind with leather sleeves, and a giant white M stitched across the chest. His name stitched in cursive over the pocket. Ethan, a second boy, stood beside him, flipping the camera off while trying to balance a can of soda on his forehead. That one was tagged as Lucas. The third stood slightly behind them, expression unreadable, hoodie half-zipped to reveal a t-shirt with an army insignia reworked into a school mascot. Vincent clicked the tag. Ben.Crowley, 45.Crowley. He knew the name, not the boy, but the last name. Major Crowley, retired, had moved back to Maple Hollow 6 years ago. Served in logistics, clean record. Occasionally showed up at veterans' breakfasts, but rarely stayed longer than a handshake and a cup of coffee. Lived 2 blocks over in one of the new brick homes off Ridgeway Lane. Vincent hadn't spoken to him in years. He opened a second tab and searched for the local yearbook archive. Within minutes, he had full names: Ethan Ward, Lucas Moreno, Benjamin Crowley, juniors, all 3. Football and track, honor roll, at least 2 of them. Vincent cross-referenced that with a town planning committee roster. Ethan's father, Councilman Lucas's mother, head of the Parks Board, Crowley's father, the major. It wasn't shocking. Vincent had seen this pattern before. Boys who moved through towns with inherited confidence, sure that their last name was an unspoken shield, the kind who knew which lines they could toe, and who would smooth things over if anything spilled too far. He clicked through to Ethan's public photos album. The most recent image showed the boy standing near the back of a red pickup. In the background, just barely visible, was the aluminum siding of a trailer. The caption read, "No one even came out." Vincent paused. He zoomed in. The angle was low, distorted, likely shot from someone crouching or holding the phone near their chest. The image wasn't incriminating on its own. But when paired with the lighter, the laugh, the voice in the video, each clue became another stone in the structure taking shape. He closed the laptop slowly and wrote the 3 names into his notebook, beneath a heading he hadn't used in over a decade: persons of interest. Under each name, he listed details: physical description, last known location, family connections, behavioral observations. Then he drew a line underneath and wrote a fourth word: shielded. He set the pen down and stared at the page. Not because he was surprised, but because he had once trained men to recognize the difference between ordinary threats and protected ones, the ones who thought they were untouchable, not because they were skilled, but because they were covered. The boys weren't acting alone. Not really. They were acting with the certainty that nothing they did would follow them home. Vincent looked over at Shadow, who was watching him from her place near the door. Still quiet, waiting. The game had changed. Now he knew who they were. Shadow had learned the world in tones, smells, and motion long before language ever mattered. Her training had started when she was barely out of her Retiree. Alert pup, assigned to a handler she would outlive, then another, and eventually Vincent. He had come to her not as her first, but her last. She was 4 then, with a healed scar along her flank and a stiffness in her gait that never fully left. But her instincts were sharp, and Vincent didn't ask for perfection. He asked for trust. That final mission was supposed to be short. It was a sweep low visibility, moderate risk, 1 village checkpoint, and a 2-hour rotation. Shadow remembered the dry heat of the sun bouncing off packed earth, the faint electric burn of distant radio chatter, and the way Vincent's voice dropped just slightly when something felt wrong. She remembered a smell acrid, sharp, human, but wrong moments before the blast. The explosion didn't land near her. It landed on a wall of earth 10 meters to the left, but the shrapnel caught her side. Vincent's arms had closed around her before the second blast even echoed. No panic, no shouting, just firm pressure against her ribs and the steady cadence of his voice in her ear. Even now, years later, when the wind shifted and brought certain smells burned plastic, male sweat, engine oil, her hackles lifted without. Her thinking, her training, wasn't something she could undo. It had become her dot when the first egg hit the trailer. Shadow had stayed quiet. That was her role, not to bark, not to give position, observe, read Vincent's posture, respond to his signals, not the noise. But when the laughter came outside the window, days later, something in her body tightened. The sound wasn't like a shout or a crite, was a taunt, and it was followed by footsteps that didn't match the rhythm of someone walking by casually. They were purposeful, cocky. That's when she moved to the window and stood still. Vincent had felt it too. He didn't rise right away. He let her hold the moment. They had done this before, a different country, different enemy, but the same dance. She waited for the sound of the drawer opening, the slow shift of Vincent's boots across the floor. That was the rhythm she knew. When his hand brushed her collar, not to restrain, but to anchor, she exhaled, a low huff, and sat. Tonight was different. The scent she picked up outside the one on the lighter was now burned into her memory. She didn't need the object anymore. The boy had passed close to the fence earlier that afternoon. He'd been trying to look casual, but his movements were clumsy, uncertain. He had paused by the edge of the yard, half laughing with another teen, tossing a stick between his hands. Shadow had marked the sound of his boots, the slope of his shoulders, the way his voice rose half a tone when he lied. That was the sound of someone pretending they weren't scared. She remembered that sound from Kandahar. Vincent always said the worst threats were the ones that smiled, the ones that acted like the rules didn't apply. And dogs, he once told a younger handler, weren't just tools, they were witnesses. They remembered more than they reacted that night. Shadow stirred twice before midnight, rising only when the wind carried something new. A trace of that synthetic vanilla again, but this time it was mixed with sweat-fresh, nervous. She rose slowly and moved to the door. Vincent was already there. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He didn't need to. His hand found the space behind her collar, and she leaned into it, not from fear, not from pain, but from recognition. The last time she'd leaned into him like that, they were lying in sand, waiting for the evac call that never came. And even now, as the trailer sat quietly under the pale moonlight of a small town that thought it had Vincent Moore figured out, Shadow knew something was coming. Because threats don't start with shouts, they start with laughs, with sugar-slick cologne, with sneakers where they don't belong. And a dog like Shadow never forgets what that meant. Vincent had set the motion-triggered camera low to the ground. half buried in the dry earth beside a stack of unused firewood. It wasn't visible from the street. The lens peeked out through a sliver of bark he had hollowed by hand. If anyone noticed it, they hadn't said, and if they had, they hadn't come close enough to see the blinking light covered in electrical tape. The camera didn't run continuously. It didn't need to. It recorded in silent bursts, infrared, time-stamped, clear enough to see expressions even in the dark dot. By the end of the week, it had captured 6 events. Only 3 were actual approaches. The others were drive-by slow, deliberate loops. In a familiar red truck with the same music pulsing faintly through closed windows, Vincent reviewed each segment in the dim glow of his laptop, a pair of over-ear headphones clamped tight. He took notes, framed numbers, time of approach, entry, points, the way the boys moved. One clip stood out. It wasn't the latest one, but the one just before the firecracker incident. The frame showed 3 silhouettes, approaching from the eastern fence line, staying low. One signaled to the others with a single raised hand-open palm, then closed fist. They paused together, then one moved left, circling wide to the back. Of the trailer where the propane tank sat, the others remained near the front steps. This wasn't teenage recklessness. It was coordination. Not perfect to loosen timing, to casual in body language, but planned. Practiced, Vincent paused the clip and zoomed in. One of the boys was holding something under his jacket. He never pulled it out. He just stood near the corner of the trailer, whispering to the others, then signaled again. 10 seconds later, they retreated the way they came. No vandalism that night, no visible damage, just rehearsal. Vincent leaned back in his chair, the footage frozen on the frame of the boy signaling with 2 fingers pressed together. He'd seen that gesture before. Not in this town, not among teenagers. In Kandahar, it had been used to communicate silent countdowns. Movement after 2. Not 3, not 1, 2. It was subtle, easy to miss, unless you were trained to see it. He watched the video again. This time he saw something else. The boy circling left had paused by the propane tank longer than necessary. He didn't just look, he bent down. The footage didn't show what he touched, but Vincent checked the tank himself the next morning. Nothing was out of place. But the thin layer of dust had been disturbed in a semicircle around the base, as if fingers had traced its outline. Vincent didn't show the footage to the sheriff. He didn't send a copy to the mayor, not because he didn't trust them, but because he didn't trust what they would do with it. The sheriff would shrug it off, just as he had with the first call. The mayor might panic or worse, try to handle it quietly, protecting reputations before property. So Vincent backed the footage up to 2 encrypted drives, labeled them by date and location, and filed them in the locked metal case beneath, the floorboard near the water heater. Only Shadow knew where he kept the key. She'd watched him bury it under the 3rd tile beneath the sink, another habit from the years before. Maple Hollow. The footage wasn't just evidence, it was intention. And once you had intention, motive followed. They weren't trying to scare him randomly. They were building something, testing limits, waiting for a line to cross. Vincent didn't need to know why. Not yet. What he knew was enough. These boys weren't acting alone. At least one of them had watched someone who knew how to move in silence, how to mask purpose as mischief. That knowledge didn't come from YouTube videos or movies. It came from proximity. Someone had taught them, and if the town didn't want to believe that, fine. Vincent didn't need their belief. He had the tape. The Maple Hollow Book Club met every other Tuesday in the back room of the library, past the tall stacks of outdated encyclopedias and a corkboard no one updated anymore. There were usually 6 or 7 regulars women in their 70s and 80s who read more out of habit than passion. They liked paperbacks with large print, strong tea, and the occasional slice of store-bought pound cake. The topic that evening was supposed to be a cozy mystery set in Cornwall. But it didn't stay that way for long. Mildred had just asked if anyone understood the point of the second subplot when the conversation drifted first to the weather, then to the rising cost of eggs, then to the incident near the edge of town. "I heard it was eggs again," someone said, carefully dabbing her mouth with a floral napkin, shaving cream too, added another, and fireworks. "What kind of child brings fireworks to someone's doorstep?" "They say he didn't even call the police," said the youngest member. A retired schoolteacher named June just cleaned it up like nothing happened. Mrs. Parson had been quiet until then, hands folded over a worn sweater that matched her lavender scarf. She was 84 now, slower than she used to be, but sharp in the ways that mattered. She'd lived in Maple Hollow her entire life and knew more about the town's undercurrents than anyone else in the room. "That man," she said, her voice calm but steady, "is not what he looks like." Everyone turned. She rarely spoke without purpose. June tilted her head. "Vincent Moore." Mrs. Parson nodded once. "I heard he keeps to himself," someone offered. "A little strange." "Strange," Mrs. Parson repeated. "No, private." She sipped her tea and placed the cup back down with deliberate care. "He doesn't talk about what he did. Not to you, not to anyone, but I know, because 2 of my nephews came home because of him." There was a pause. No one interrupted. One was pinned behind a fuel truck during a convoy ambush, couldn't get out. The heat was so bad they couldn't breathe, and the radio was jammed. Everyone thought it was a loss. Then someone not even part of their unit crawled under the engine block with nothing but a knife and a flare, got them out. That was Vincent. She tapped the edge of her plate lightly, not for emphasis, just to steady her own thoughts. Second nephew had PTSD so bad he couldn't leave the house for 2 years. Vincent wrote him letters, didn't even know him. Found out through someone at the VA, those letters pulled him through. Still has them. Calls him Sarge in every one. Mildred blinked. "Are you sure it's the same man?" "Of course. I'm sure," Mrs. Parson said. "I met him at the memorial service." Shook his hand. "And when he moved into that trailer, I recognized him. He didn't recognize me and have to." The room was silent now, the book club forgotten. "He doesn't need you to know who he is," she said. "That's the thing. Men like that never do. But don't mistake his quiet for weakness. And don't let your sons or grandsons mistake it either." Someone shifted in her chair. "I think my neighbor's boy might have been involved." Mrs. Parson didn't respond to that. She just looked down at her tea again, eyes calm but unreadable. Outside, the sky had gone completely dark. A few cars passed on Main Street, headlights casting brief glows on the library window. Inside, no one spoke for a long moment. Then June finally asked, "Why doesn't he just say something?" Mrs. Parson smiled faintly because he's said enough in places that counted, and here he doesn't owe anybody anything. The next week, a small bouquet of chrysanthemums appeared near Vincent's mailbox. No card, just the flowers, gently tied with twine. He didn't mention them, but he moved them to the window ledge where Shadow slept. And for the first time in a long time, he left the curtain open just a crack. It was just past sunset when the knock came, not loud, not rushed, but deliberate. Vincent was at the sink, rinsing out a coffee mug, the same one he used every evening after feeding Shadow. The dog was already at the door, alert but not tense. Head slightly tilted. She didn't growl. That meant it wasn't trouble. Not yet. Vincent dried his hands and opened the door just enough to see who stood on the other side. Deputy Caleb Rios, young mid-20s maybe, new to the town, or at least new to the badge. His uniform was crisp, not yet dulled by years of routine. The flashlight clipped to his vest was still polished, but the way his eyes moved quick. Scanning told Vincent this wasn't just a courtesy call. "Evening, sir," Rios said, voice low, respectful. "Mind if I step in for a second?" Vincent nodded once and stepped aside. Shadow didn't move from her post by the counter. She watched the deputy without blinking. Rios didn't take his hat off, didn't sit. He stood just inside the doorway. Shifting slightly on his heels, he glanced around the small trailer once, eyes touching the files stacked near the desk. The old maps pinned to a corkboard, the empty coffee pot. "I'm not here official," he began, clearing his throat. "Didn't log anything. Didn't turn on the dash cam either. Just something you should hear." Vincent crossed his arms. Rios took a breath. "Back off." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't quite a warning either, more like a preemptive damage report. Back off what? Vincent asked, even though he already knew. "The footage," Rios said. "The stuff you've been collecting, people know, or they suspect. Doesn't matter. It's making its way up the chain." Vincent didn't respond. He watched Rios the way he used to watch new recruits. Not for what they said, but for where their eyes went when they weren't speaking. "You're not wrong about the boys," Rios continued, "but they've got people watching out for them. Names that would rather this all stay quiet. And if you push it, press charges, circulate video, ask questions, well, it's going to make noise for the wrong people. Vincent's jaw moved. Once, just a shift of the muscle. "You think I'm worried about small-town reputations?" he asked. "No," Rios said. "I think you're smart enough to know how quick things can twist. I think you know that one kid ends up with a scratch, and suddenly its volatile veteran lashes out. He let that hang there." Rios looked uncomfortable, not afraid, not embarrassed, just tired in the way that comes from knowing how a system works and how it doesn't. "I shouldn't be here," he added. "But you helped a guy I trained with. Afghanistan, 2012, said your dog found him in a ditch when the drone couldn't. He still limps." Vincent didn't ask the name. Rios looked over at Shadow. "She's still sharp." Vincent nodded. "She remembers more than most of us," he said quietly. Rios shifted again. "I'll deny I said any of this, but you got choices. Either let this burn out quietly or make enough noise to wake everyone and risk getting blamed for starting the fire." Vincent walked to the door and opened it wider. The night was still and cool, the sky clear enough to see the faint red pulse of the radio tower on the far hill. He didn't answer right away. Rios stepped onto the porch. Pausing only once, "I think you're doing the right thing," he said, "but right and easy rarely shake hands." Then he walked off into the dark, his footsteps light but steady on the gravel dot inside. Vincent sat down at the table. Shadow rested her head on his boot. He didn't touch the footage that night, didn't open the file. But he did check the lockbox beneath the floor and made sure the backup drive was still there, just in case. The hiss of the coffee pot was still settling into silence when Shadow let out a sound Vincent hadn't heard in years ashort. Guttural bark, sharp and immediate. It wasn't her usual alert or the low growl of uncertainty. This was different. It came from the throat, clipped and purposeful. Vincent's body responded before his thoughts did. He was up, already moving toward the back of the trailer, where she stood rigid near the window, ears pinned, eyes fixed on the gravel lot outside. He followed her gaze. At first, he didn't see it, just shadows, dust, the faint orange cast of a distant porch light from across the field. Then movement, fast, low, and trailing a flicker of light. Something arced through the air and landed just past the steps with a soft thump that carried too much weight to be harmless. He stepped outside without hesitation. No shoes, just socks on cold metal. The light from the kitchen spilled behind him as he narrowed his eyes to adjust. It took seconds to reach the edge of the platform. But by then, the smoke was rising. A blackened roll of toilet paper soaked in something flammable. Then lit lay smoldering less than 4 feet from the propane line. The end was still glowing, but the flame had choked itself out against the damp gravel. It hadn't caught. Not this time. Vincent crouched beside it and didn't touch it right away. He studied the scorch pattern, the direction of the toss, the half-circle of disturbed dirt around it. It hadn't rolled far. That meant it was aimed. The toss came from the open stretch between his trailer and the rear woods. A short range, he stood, eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing but stillness. No footsteps now. No laughter. No getaway car. Shadow hadn't moved from the doorway, but her body was taut, tail stiff, shoulders square. She knew what that had been. So did Vincent. He retrieved the lighter from his pocket and flicked it briefly. Not for light, just habit. Then he walked back inside and pulled the emergency sheet from the drawer. He hadn't used it in years, just a foldout from a retired response kit. Laminated and faded, but the checklists were still sharp: post-combustion threat assessment, evidence integrity before contact, ground residue triangulation. He knelt and photographed everything. The paper roll, the blackened soil. A small smudge on the aluminum siding, barely visible unless you looked for it. Then he backed it all up on his hard drive, tagged with time and date. Same protocol he'd followed downrange. Documentation first, emotion later. When he came back inside, he locked the door and double-checked the gas valve near the stove. Not because he was afraid, because habit is its own kind of armor. Shadow finally broke posture and came to sit beside him. They tested how close they could get, he murmured, not looking at her. She pressed her head against his leg, then laid down, ears still twitching toward the window. Vincent stared at the monitor. He rewound the last 2 hours of camera footage, frame by frame, and there between 11:03 and 11:04 p.m. a silhouette passed the tree line. Just one, too dark to identify. But they didn't run. They walked, casual, confident, and then nothing. He played the clip again. Same stride, same direction. They hadn't even looked back after the throw. Vincent knew that kind of behavior. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't thrill-seeking. It was testing response time, and the message wasn't subtle. The burn mark would wash away with rain. But the distance between it and the propane line would stay sharp in his mind. This wasn't vandalism anymore. This was escalation. He shut the laptop and turned off the lights. The trailer sank into a quiet darkness. Outside, the chirp of a night bird echoed low against the fence line. In the quiet, he spoke softly. "Second warning," he said. Shadow didn't move, but her eyes stayed open. The morning after the fire attempt was cool and quiet. Dew clung to the grass in tight beads, and the air smelled faintly of scorched paper. Vincent had already walked the perimeter twice by the time the town started waking up. A tire rolled. Down the distant street, somewhere a screen door slammed and a few porch lights blinked off one by one. Shadow was resting, her head perched on the worn welcome mat, eyes following every small shift in the trees. Vincent moved with the same deliberate rhythm he'd learned decades ago, low, methodical, precise. Not because of fear, but because when things shifted into unfamiliar terrain, clarity came only with discipline. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and opened the tin box from under the cabinet. Inside was a list of names, not contacts, not old friends, just numbers that had once mattered. Not everyone was still alive. Not everyone still took calls, but one of them owed him a return. He picked up the prepaid phone, not his regular cell, and dialed a 12-digit number he hadn't used in 9 years. It rang 3 times before a woman answered. "DHS Office of Civil Liaison. You've reached Janine." Vincent didn't respond to that name. He waited. "Is this regarding the tri-code clearance?" Now he spoke, quietly. "This is Staff Sergeant Vincent Moore, requesting a secure transfer to 417 contact. No callback necessary." There was a pause, then a click. 2 more rings followed before the line connected again. A male voice answered this time rough, worn and unmistakably familiar. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, sounding halfway between surprised and cautious. "Sarge, that you?" "Cutter," Vincent replied. "Didn't expect you to be the one picking up lines these days. Retired last year. Thought I'd golf. Homeland found me instead." "Figures," Vincent said, sipping. "I need context, no favors, just clarity." He heard Cutter adjust in his chair, maybe close a door. "Talk 3 teens," Vincent said. "Coordinated behavior, repeated targeting, accelerating. Last night, incendiary attempt near propane line. No damage, no public report, location. Maple Hollow, off the 11 bypass. Rural, trailer lot east of the main grid," Cutter grunted. "That's about 5 jurisdictions out of my reach, but go on." Vincent laid out the timeline, the egging the anonymous note. The second escalation with firecrackers and trash, the lighter. With assent, he recognized the footage showing a well-timed, confident delivery. "You think they're being used?" Cutter asked after a moment. Vincent didn't answer right away, maybe not knowingly. There was a pause, longer this time. "I can poke around," Cutter said finally. "Get a feel for what might be overlapping in your region." Quietly, no. "Red flags." "I don't want surveillance," Vincent said. "I want patterns. I think someone's letting them practice." Cutter let out a slow exhale. "Christ, what's the town like? Small. Complacent." Sheriff shrugs everything off. "Mayor's alert, but boxed in. Boys are sons of respected names." "Of course they are," Cutter said. "That's how it usually starts." There was a beep in the background, probably an internal alert, and then silence again. "All right," Cutter said. "Give me 24. I'll scan Homeland logs and shared tags for your zip and surrounding counties. I'll cross-check with training drills, government leases, and transport clearances. I won't flag your name unless I see something that directly threads back to you. Appreciate it." "No favor," Cutter replied. "You once found me when half a unit thought I was dead. just coffee debt being paid. Vincent gave a dry smile. "You still take it black?" "Regrettably." Before they ended the call, Cutter added one last thought. "If this is what you think it is, you might need to decide real soon whether you want to expose it or let it rot. Because some things, if they're being tested this close to home, they're not meant to be seen." Vincent ended the call without another word. He placed the phone back in the tin, resealed it, and slid it into the hidden compartment beneath the floorboard. Outside, the sun was climbing slowly, lighting up the line of pines behind the trailer. Shadow stirred and stretched, but didn't get up. Vincent stood at the window, watching the stillness. He didn't have answers yet, but he knew how to wait, and waiting, for men like him, was never passive. It was mid-afternoon on a Saturday, and the town's only grocery store was half full, just enough traffic to feel normal. Vincent moved quietly, pushing a worn metal cart down the baking aisle, selecting his usual staples: flour, powdered milk, canned soup. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale, steady glare over the rows. He didn't rush. He rarely did. Shadow wasn't with him this time. She never liked the slick linoleum floors and the tight corners. She stayed in the truck, windows cracked, her nose just behind the glass, watching every entrance and exit from the lot. She'd been trained not to bark unless it mattered. Vincent reached for a jar of peanut butter and paused. Just ahead, by the freezer section, stood one of the boys. Thin frame, light hoodie, school-issued gym bag slung over one shoulder, the logo for Maple Hollow High stitched across the strap. His name wasn't yet certain, just a face Vincent had seen from the surveillance footage, but the body language matched: the slouch of someone used to slipping under scrutiny, the sideways glance of a kid who'd never expected to be held accountable. Vincent didn't rush toward him. He simply finished collecting his items, rolled the cart forward, and ended up in line behind the boy at checkout. One bottle of soda, a pack of gum, nothing more. The kid glanced back once, did a double take. His posture stiffened. Vincent didn't speak until they stepped outside. The boy turned left, toward the bike rack, earbuds half in. The wind tugged slightly at his sleeves. Vincent followed, stepped slow, precise. He stopped about 6 feet behind. "Him, you got a minute?" The boy froze, didn't turn around. Vincent's voice was level, calm, but not casual. "Did you mean to hit my dog?" The boy turned, nose low, unsure. His eyes darted around the lot, as if expecting someone to intervene, someone to vouch for him. But there was no one nearby, just the rustle of grocery bags and the low rumble of engines idling IWAT. Vincent stepped closer, not menacing, just closing space with the quiet authority of someone used to field briefings that mattered. "Dog," he repeated. "She was by the trailer the night of the second attack. You were part of it, the lighter, the noise, the aim." The boy's mouth opened, then shut. He shook his head, but didn't offer denial. Just a shallow breath and a flushed face. "She didn't bark," Vincent added. "She doesn't need to. But she got there first. If that fire had landed 2 feet closer, it would have been her first." The boy looked at the pavement. Vincent didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. But each word landed with the weight of something understood too late. "I'm not asking for an apology," he said. "I'm asking if you knew what you were doing, if you were targeting her, or if you were just throwing things into the dark." The boy whispered, "I didn't know." Vincent studied him. No defiance, no pride, just a shaky mix of fear. "Shame you have a father?" Vincent asked. The boy nodded. "He in town?" Another nod. "Ask him," Vincent said quietly. "Ask him what it means to serve beside someone who doesn't hesitate, even when you're wrong. Ask him what it means to be trusted." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked back toward the truck. Shadow watched him through the window, ears perked, tail tapping once. Behind him, the boy remained still. That night, no one came. Near the trailer, no laughter, no footsteps, no flickers of light across the yard. But Vincent didn't relax. He knew fear could pause a hand, but it rarely changed what pulled the string. It started with a phone held just below the chin, framed against a bedroom wall painted soft blue. The lighting was uneven, the voice quiet. There was no music, no filters, no theatrics. Just a girl 16. Into the camera, her shoulders stiff but not defensive. She hit record, paused once, then began speaking. "My name is Carolyn," she said, "and I don't care anymore if this gets me in trouble." The video appeared on a local youth forum first, the kind where students usually posted skate clips and prom outfit debates. Then it was shared on a community Facebook page. From there, it moved faster. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't know what was going on," she said. "My brother was one of them. He's the tall one in the hoodie in the video that got deleted, the one laughing when they egged that trailer on the east lot." She looked down for a second, exhaled slowly, then continued. "I didn't say anything. At first, because it's hard when your family's the one doing something wrong. And yeah, I'm scared. My parents know. They told him not to talk. They said it would blow over." Caroline paused again, not for effect, just gathering. "But then I saw the second video, the one they didn't post, the one with the firecrackers and the trash. That one scared me. Not because of the dog, though that's awful too, but because they weren't just messing around anymore. They were organized, like they planned it." The video was just under 3 minutes, but every word had weight. She named names. First names only, but clear enough for the town to know who she meant. She didn't sound angry. She sounded tired, like someone who had been carrying a truth that had grown heavier by the day. "They weren't acting alone," she said. "There's this guy, he works part-time at the rec center. He's not a teacher, but he coaches pickup games, sometimes runs drills. He talks like he used to be military, but I don't think he really was. He's the one who told them Vincent Moore was a washed-up freak and said it'd be funny to mess with him." Caroline said his name, too. Slowly, clearly. The man she named had been seen at a few council events, occasionally wore a campaign shirt for a local politician, and sometimes gave rides to boys whose parents worked late. No one had paid him much attention until now. "He called it practice," she said, "like they were training, like it was a game." The last part of her video was the quietest. "I know I didn't throw anything, but I didn't stop it either. And I don't want to be part of something that hurts someone just because they live quietly. That man has a dog that doesn't bark, and I think she sees more than most people do." When the video ended, there was no outro, no plea for shares, no hashtags, just her reaching to stop the recording. It spread faster than most things did. In Maple Hollow. By evening, the principal had called an emergency meeting with school staff. The mayor's office issued a vague statement about youth accountability and inappropriate peer influence. Parents called other parents, teachers whispered in lounges, and a few familiar names began quietly scrubbing their social media profiles. Vincent didn't watch the video immediately. He didn't need to. Someone had already slipped a printout of the transcript into his mailbox no return address, just folded neatly between his utility bill and a coupon flyer. Shadow sniffed it, then lay down again. He read it once, slowly, then folded it and placed it in the same tin where the phone now lived. A second page followed the name of the man Caroline mentioned, scribbled in blue ink, underlined twice. Vincent didn't say anything out loud, but he left the porch light on that night. For himself, for the girl who decided not to stay quiet. By Monday morning, Carolyn was sitting in the vice principal's office, flanked by her mother and a school counselor who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The blinds were pulled halfway, letting streaks of pale sun fall across the office carpet in slanted bars. A dusty bookshelf held outdated binders labeled with old safety plans, and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee from the nearby staff lounge. Vice Principal Holloway folded his hands on the desk. His expression was calm, practiced, the kind reserved for disciplinary meetings where the outcome was already decided. "We understand you were the one who posted the video," he began. Caroline nodded once. Her mother said nothing, only crossed, her arms a little tighter across her chest. "The issue," Holloway continued, "is that your video named students currently enrolled at this school. You also implicated a part-time staff member. That creates complications, legal, social, administrative." Carolyn didn't blink. "We're not here to debate the content," he said, "but rather the method. Broadcasting on school platforms, even indirectly, without prior permission, violates district guidelines." Caroline tilted her head. "So, you're saying I broke a rule by telling the truth?" Holloway offered a neutral smile. "You shared sensitive information. In a public format, there are consequences." The letter of suspension was slid across the desk. 3 days unauthorized use of school-linked communication channels was the official charge. It wasn't expulsion, but it was enough to send a message: speak up. and we'll find a reason to quiet you. That message, however, didn't stay contained to that office. By the time Caroline and her mother exited the building, a teacher had already texted another. A student overheard the hallway conversation and posted it on a local youth forum. They suspended the girl who told the truth, not the ones who threw fire at Yvette's trailer. Within hours, the story spread through Maple Hollow faster than the school board expected, and this time it didn't stop with teens. Parents started making calls. One mother, whose son had quit the football team after hearing what the boys were doing, emailed the superintendent directly. A retired civics teacher wrote an op-ed in the town newsletter titled, "When Truth Gets Punished, We All Shrink." And one knew exactly who forwarded the story to a small regional news outlet with a quiet but loyal readership by Tuesday. A local reporter had driven down from Ridge County and parked outside the school in a faded sedan. She didn't carry a camera, crew, just a legal pad and a voice recorder. She waited at the lot's edge until Caroline left the building, then respectfully introduced herself. "You don't have to go on record," the reporter said gently, "but we'd like to hear your side. We've seen the video, and the public has questions." Caroline didn't speak at first, but she didn't run either. Back at the district office, things were less calm. Board members argued over phone calls and policy memos. The principal received a stern warning from the superintendent to avoid any further disciplinary escalation. Meanwhile, a Freedom of Information Act request was filed by an outside legal group, seeking staff emails related to the incident. The school tried to walk it back by Wednesday. The suspension was labeled temporary administrative leave instead. They called Caroline's mother and said there had been a miscommunication. They offered to let her return without the mark on her record if she agreed not to post. Again, Caroline declined. "I already posted what mattered," she told them. "You can't unsay the truth." Vincent heard about the fallout secondhand. A neighbor brought it up while bringing by mail that had been misdelivered. "Whole town's talking about that girl," she said. "The school's in a mess. It's people siding with her, even folks who don't usually say much." He nodded but didn't comment. Shadow sat by the doorway, ears flicking now and then. The next morning, tucked beneath the newspaper on his step, was a small envelope. Inside was a thank you card, no signature, just a single typed sentence on the back. "Your silence taught her to speak." The folding chairs were arranged in uneven rows, some wobbling slightly on the scuffed wooden floor of the Maple Hollow Veterans. Hall dust motes floated lazily through the light, slanting in from the tall windows. And the flag at the front of the room had a slight lean, one corner drooping where the fabric had come loose from its clasp. But the room was full, every seat taken. People stood along the walls, some with arms folded, others with hands tucked. In jacket pockets, it wasn't advertised as an event. There were no flyers, just a mention at the diner, a quiet word passed around the American Legion post, and a nod from Vincent when the mayor asked quietly if it might be a good idea to remind folks. Vincent wore his old field jacket. The name patch had faded, but the stitching still held. He didn't speak much, just stepped to the center of the open floor with Shadow at his side, her black and tan coat sleek under the fluorescent lights. Room stilled, he gave a soft hand signal, almost imperceptible. And Shadow sat another flick of his wrist, and she dropped into a low crawl. Eyes fixed forward, he walked in a wide circle, barely speaking, just short whistles, small gestures. Shadow weaved between cones, halted exactly at the edge of a taped boundary line, then turned on command to face a mock intruder, volunteer from the Legion, padded sleeve at the ready. Vincent's voice broke the silence then. Steady, low target. Move. Shadow launched, not with violence, but with precision. She clamped on the sleeve with controlled force, never touching skin. The volunteer didn't even flinch. When Vincent gave the release signal, she let go instantly and returned to heel. A few claps sounded, cautious at first, then grew louder. The mayor, seated in the front row in a navy blue pantsuit, leaned forward, eyes narrowed, not in judgment. But in focus, she had heard the rumors, read the incident reports, knew Vincent's service record had been redacted in parts. She didn't ask questions about that anymore. But seeing the dog trained for tactical entry, for threat detection, for silent holds, did something more powerful than paperwork ever could. Vincent gestured to the side, and a small table was brought forward. On it sat 3 items: a spent shell casing, a lighter, and a small roll of tape. He said nothing. Shadow sat before the table. He gave one word: find. She sniffed each item once, then gently nosed the lighter. Vincent nodded. That was the scent from the firecracker attack, the same trace element found near the propane line days earlier. He turned to the crowd, speaking for the first time beyond command phrases. This dog isn't a pet. She's not a trick show. She was trained in southern Helmand to detect things. Before they happen, she saved 5 men in 2 deployments. And last week, she saved me again. The room was silent. The mayor folded her hands, expression unreadable. Vincent stepped back. He didn't ask for applause, didn't offer explanation, but a man from the back, wearing a ball cap stitched with the words USS Theodore Roosevelt, stood and clapped twice low. Solid. Then others joined. It wasn't about the performance. It was about the quiet realization of what had been underestimated, what had been mocked, what had stood sentry while the town debated noise ordinances and shrugged off youth vandalism. The demonstration, a few stayed behind. A high school teacher quietly shook Vincent's hand. A woman from the local hardware store offered to replace the broken siding on his trailer. The mayor didn't say much, just approached with a polite nod and said, "I'll make sure your lot permit gets extended. We'll handle the paperwork." Vincent nodded. Shadow sat beside him, gaze fixed ahead, unmoving. That night, no one egged the trailer. No footsteps crossed the yard. And in the town of Maple Hollow, for the first time in weeks, silence didn't feel like tension. It felt like respect. The folding chairs were set up in neat rows inside the Maple Hollow Community Center, and the whiteboard at the front still read zoning, hearing public comment, 6:30 p.m. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, just a routine review of lot used near the eastern edge of town, a few lines about water access, a brief mention of mobile home permits. But by the time the gavel sounded and the town clerk took attendance, the air had already changed. Vincent Moore sat near the back, not in uniform, not even in his old field jacket this time, just a plain brown sweater, hands resting on his knees. Shadow lay at his feet, still as stone, her ears flicking only occasionally. They'd been invited, not requested, not summoned invited, but the room wasn't ready for what came next. Mayor Clark opened the session with a neutral tone. This meeting is now in order. Item 1 on the agenda is a lot use permit renewal. For Lot 17B, Perimeter Zone, East Side, public comments are welcome. The first speaker was a man in his early 40s, Colin Tate, real estate agent, wore crisp shirts even in summer. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. With all due respect, he began. This area is seeing development. Property values are shifting. Having a trailer parked long-term on a visible lot sends the wrong message, especially with all the recent activity. A woman near the front shifted in her seat. She asked, voice sharp, "You mean the attacks?" Colin hesitated. "I'm not excusing what happened, but we have to consider the bigger picture. If Maple Hollow wants to grow, we can't be seen as a town that tolerates disorder or unusual." Residents' whispers rose behind him. A few heads turned toward Vincent, who hadn't moved. Shadow remained curled beside his boot. A second speaker stepped up, Marcy Dolan, whose son played on the high school baseball team. "I just think we need to be fair," she said. "These were kids, teenagers. They didn't mean real harm. And now there's talk of suspensions, criminal records. I mean, where's the line between discipline and ruining someone's future?" From the far wall, an older man in a veteran's cap stood slowly. "My boy was 19 when he was buried," he said. No one worried about ruining his future when he was handed a rifle and a patch and told to keep a hill no one remembers. That silenced the room for a beat. Then another voice, soft, older, familiar. Mrs. Parson from the library. "I remember when this town took care of its own," she said. "Vincent didn't come here to bother anyone. He came because it was quiet, because it was safe. We made it unsafe." Someone called out from the side, "It's not just about him. What if more people start showing up in trailers? What's next? Campsites, tents?" Another replied, "So veterans aren't welcome. If their homes have wheels now." Voices began overlapping. The council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. One tapped their pen nervously against a stack of printed permits. The zoning map projected on the screen was long forgotten. A teenage girl near the back, the same one who had spoken up online, rose from her seat and said just 3 words, "He lives here." It cut through the noise more than any shout. The mayor raised her hand and stood. "This hearing is not about public perception," she said. "It is about one resident's legal right to remain on property he has occupied for 7 years without a single code violation." Her tone was calm but firm. "If we're concerned about values," she added, "we should remember which ones matter." No vote was taken that night. The hearing was adjourned early due to heightened tension. But no one forgot what was said. The next morning, a revised agenda quietly circulated it. Permit renewal marked for approval without further public discussion. Vincent left the meeting without speaking. He held the door for 3 people on his way out. Shadow followed, never pulling on the leash, never breaking her stride, and though no one called it a victory, the space outside the community center felt a little different as the doors closed. Behind them, not triumphant, just steady, like ground that finally stopped shaking. It started with a quiet request, not a press release, not a news segment, just an inquiry made through the proper channels by a retired liaison who owed Vincent a favor from years ago. A week later, a package arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside were copies, not full files. Not everything. Some pages were still redacted, in thick black ink, but enough to paint a clearer picture, enough to change minds. The first page bore a header from the Department of Defense, dated 2007. Operation identifiers filled the margin, unfamiliar to civilians, but meaningful to those who knew. Under personnel summary, Vincent Moore's name appeared beside the words reconnaissance team leader, followed by a list of engagements across 3 regions of Afghanistan. The phrase "zero team casualties under leadership" was underlined. Further in, there was a commendation, Service Achievement Medal with V device for valor. The citation read, "For exemplary actions during Operation Raptor's Nest, demonstrating decisive leadership under direct threat and extracting wounded personnel with no loss of life." It described an ambush in Kandahar province, a pinned convoy, a loss of radio contact. Vincent had rerouted the team on foot, cutting through terrain not mapped for extraction. He didn't leave anyone behind. The write-up noted he refused medevac for his own injury until after securing the last soldier. One section focused not on Vincent, but on Shadow. Her full designation was K9 Unit 731A, Shadow, Belgian Malinois, female, weight class 60. LBs attached were scans of her training completion certificate from Lockland Air Force Base and a field performance review, signed by a commanding officer. "Exceeds operational standards," it read. "Specialty, explosive detection, silent signal response, wounded soldier identification." One mission record showed Shadow locating a pressure-triggered IED before it could be tripped by a medic rushing toward an injured Marine. Another listed her response to an unspoken hand signal, resulting in the location of a hidden cache before ground scans confirmed it. Included were 2 photographs. The first showed Vincent kneeling beside Shadow in full gear, both covered in dust. His hand rested on her shoulder. She sat upright, alert, her eyes locked forward. A patch on Vincent's vest read "No quit." The second photo was more subdued, taken after retirement. Vincent and Shadow seated outside a hangar in partial shade. No uniforms, no weapons, just quiet posture. 2 figures shaped by service, now held together by habit and memory. When the photos were shared first, quietly, then online, they traveled, faster than the town's whispers ever had. A local blogger posted them with a caption, "The man they egged, the dog they mocked." Comments poured in, some from neighbors, some from veterans across the state who had heard of Operation Raptors. Neston remembered the team that never made the news but always made it home. Even the high school newspaper picked up the story, publishing a feature with the headline, "What We Didn't Know About Lot 17B." The journalism teacher said it was the most read article they'd posted in 5 years at the town library. A laminated copy of the citation was quietly added to the community board. No ceremony, no announcement, but someone tacked it beside a flyer for the local pancake breakfast, and it stayed there. Vincent didn't respond publicly. He didn't need to. The file spoke for itself. And in Maple Hollow, a town that once debated whether a trailer belonged on the edge of development, people started to wave when they passed it. Some slowed down. A few stopped by with offers a replacement floodlight, a reinforced mailbox, a small bag of biscuits for Shadow. No medals were handed out that week, but something changed, not just in how people looked at Vincent, but in how they looked at what silence might hide. The school didn't say much at first, just a short announcement tucked inside the morning bulletin. Student disciplinary action has been taken regarding an incident involving unauthorized access to district property. No name, no detail. Most students ignored it, but the teachers noticed the tension in the hallways, the whispers during lunch, the absence of one particular voice in the back of homeroom. Jared Mitchell had always been the loud one. Letterman jacket, car with the muffler that roared down Maple Hollow's quiet roads. His friends laughed louder when he was around. His teachers gave longer pauses before calling on him, but he hadn't been seen since Tuesday. When the school IT administrator flagged a strange login pattern from the library desktop, it wasn't amateur work. The breach had been clean almost. A few lines of altered timestamps, access to the internal surveillance system, even temporary deletion of files stored on a separate drive, but whoever had done it didn't count on the backups, or the fact that the camera outside Vincent Moore's trailer didn't belong to the school, didn't operate on the same system, and didn't delete footage unless Vincent told it to. Jared was pulled from third period by the assistant principal and escorted to the office. It didn't cause much of a scene. He smirked on his way out. Thought it was about the old egging thing. Probably figured it would blow over. But the room he was taken to had a district official already seated, a woman from IT security, and when the printouts came out, logs keystrokes. Access traces his smirk faded. By the time the expulsion was finalized, the story was already in circulation. Not through gossip, but because the girl who had come forward earlier posted a video. They tried to erase what happened, she said, her voice steady. But erasing a file doesn't erase the truth. In the video, she explained how Jared had used a teacher's login, slipped into the media room during lunch, and accessed the town's joint-use server. He had found the footage from Vincent's motion, camera saved onto a public folder after the community requested evidence be shared and tried to wipe it. What he didn't know was that Vincent had anticipated that the footage he uploaded wasn't the only copy, it wasn't even the full version. Later that evening, the mayor confirmed in a press statement that evidence tampering had occurred, and that one student was being disciplined for unlawful access. "Let me be clear," she said. "This is not about teenagers making mistakes. This is about someone attempting to erase accountability." The town's newspaper ran a small editorial the next morning, "When boys try to erase men," named Jared either. But it didn't need to. The photo beside the column showed Vincent standing beside Shadow, the two of them framed by the trailer and the rising sun behind it. The article posed a quiet question. What does it say about us? The first response to truth is to destroy the record of it. Some called it excessive, said expulsion was too much. Others said it wasn't enough. Jared's father, a local business owner, claimed it was political, that his son was being used as a scapegoat. But even he didn't challenge the video evidence. When it appeared on a local forum, time-stamped, clear, irrefutable, Vincent never spoke publicly about the expulsion. He didn't need to. The files had already done their job, not just by revealing what happened, but by showing who tried to hide it. And at the edge of Maple Hollow, the trailer remained quiet, unmoved. But now, the path to it wasn't scattered, with broken eggshells or trash. It was clean, and stayed that way. The wind was light that morning, barely more than a breath, but enough to rustle the maple leaves that edged the property. Vincent had taken Shadow out for her usual loop past the tree line, along the old fence line that marked the property boundary, and back around the gravel turn where the soil never quite held grass. It was routine, part of the rhythm, the same pace, same path, same silent watchfulness. But that morning, Shadow stopped. Not just paused, stopped, rigid. Her posture shifted subtly, head low, ears forward. Her nose hovered over a patch of ground, beneath a tangle of brush about 5 feet off the main trail. Vincent noted the tension in her spine, the weight shift in her pause. He gave a soft word, and she moved slightly, circling the spot once, twice, then sat down and looked up. He knew what that meant, with gloved hands. Vincent knelt and began clearing the surface. It didn't take much. The covering was crudesome. Sticks, leaves, a bit of loose soil pressed down hurriedly. About a foot beneath, tucked inside a faded navy blue backpack, was a bundle of items that didn't belong anywhere near the edge of his land. He didn't touch it immediately. He examined, assessed. Shadow sat nearby, eyes scanning the woods. The pack was old but dry, the zipper partially undone. Inside, a half-used bottle of lighter fluid, a box of wooden matches wrapped in rubber bands to firecrackers taped together, and a folded sheet of lined notebook paper torn from a spiral pad. Vincent used a pen to lift the flap and unfold it. There were names. His was at the top, dot below it, Lot 17B, dog, and then a list of phrases written in what looked like teenage shorthand. One read, "Get vid this time," another, "Mask plus can." Near the bottom, it said simply, "Leave no trace." Vincent's hand tightened around the pen. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't impulsive. Someone had come here, scouted it, written things down, prepared tools, hidden them. Someone had returned with intention, not just mischief. It confirmed what his instincts had been telling him for weeks. The coordination, the rehearsed timing, the avoidance of security cameras. And now this, a cache, a blueprint. A step between vandalism and something worse. He walked the perimeter again, eyes scanning the soil. Shadow followed a scent trail for about 15 more feet before it dissipated. They'd taken care not to leave footprints, at least not obvious ones. But dogs don't forget scent, and Vincent knew she'd remember it if she smelled it again. Back at the trailer, he set the backpack on a tarp in the rear shed, careful not to disturb its contents. He took photographs from multiple angles, matches, paper, accelerant. Then he sealed it in a plastic tub. Not for the sheriff, not yet. Instead, he made a note and pinned it to the wall inside. Just 3 words, intent was clear. He didn't call anyone that day. He didn't post. He didn't mention it to the mayor or the deputy or even Mrs. Parson. He simply adjusted the angle of the night vision camera to cover the tree line. More directly, he reinforced the hinge on the back door. He walked the loop twice that evening. What the backpack revealed wasn't just a threat hit, was a confirmation that the stakes had risen. That someone wanted more than just a reaction. They wanted a result, and they thought he wouldn't see it coming. But Vincent had spent too long reading terrain, watching for the shift in atmosphere before the first shot was fired. He knew what preparation smelled like. He knew how close it could get before anyone else noticed, and he wasn't going to wait to be surprised. The council chamber was full, not packed like during the zoning debates or budget discussions, but heavy with the kind of silence that meant people weren't just attending, they were listening. The town clerk shuffled papers at the front table. Mayor Clark sat with her hands folded tightly, not touching the glass of water in front of her. The hum of the ceiling fan echoed louder than usual. Vincent didn't sit in the front row. He stood in the back, leaning lightly against the paneled wall, one hand resting on Shadow's back as she lay alert beside him. The meeting wasn't called for him, not officially, but everyone in the room knew what had brought them there. It started 2 weeks prior when a community petition reached the county offices. Nearly 200 signatures questioning the conduct of Sheriff Kenley. At first, it was framed as procedural. Did the sheriff follow up on citizen reports? Were complaints logged properly? Were threats taken seriously? But then came the audit, conducted by a third party from outside the county. The audit combed through body cam logs, dispatch reports, and internal emails. And what it uncovered wasn't just carelessness, it was pattern. A pattern of deferred complaints, missing documentation, unlogged calls from Vincent Moore's address, and evidence intake sheets that didn't match what was submitted. There were at least 3 reports made in the past year involving juvenile misconduct in the area around Lot 17B. All 3 had been marked, no further action required. 2 were filed by neighbors. 1 included photos, none had follow-up interviews. Whistleblower dispatcher nearing retirement submitted a statement under seal. She said Kenley had advised staff to not escalate anything around the trailer guy, that it was politically easier to let it die down. The quote that stood out most was scrawled in the margins of a scanned note. "Don't dig into the varsity crowd. Town won't like it." The evidence didn't point to conspiracy, exactly. More like negligence with a purpose. Looking the other way, because looking closely would have meant confronting families with influence. donors with kids, names that showed up on town plaques and fundraisers. So when the agenda item reached departmental oversight findings, all eyes turned to the second row where Sheriff Kenley sat. No uniform, just a plain buttoned shirt, sleeves rolled. His face was unreadable. Mayor Clark read the resignation letter herself, word by word. She didn't rush to the residence. Of Maple Hollow, it began, and the council to which I answer, I hereby submit my resignation, effective immediately, from the office of sheriff. It has become clear that recent events, both those made public and those long ignored, have eroded the trust required to serve this community. While my intentions were never malicious, the outcome of inaction has been harm, and for that, I accept full responsibility. There was no applause, just a pause, long and weighted. One council member asked if criminal charges would follow. The mayor deferred, said the county was reviewing it, that accountability was being handled at the appropriate level. The deputy sheriff would act. In the interim, Kenley stood, nodded once to the mayor, and walked out through the side door. Not a word, not a glance backward. Later, someone would say they saw him driving north that same night. Truck packed to the brim, a U-Haul hitch on the back. He didn't stop for gas in town. Back in the meeting room, the attention turned toward policy revisions, new procedures, transparency measures, but it was the silence afterward that lingered. The look on people's faces as they left, many of them parents, some of them neighbors of the very teens involved, told more than any transcript would. Vincent left last no statement, no handshake, just a soft click of shadows, leash, and the sound of his boots against tile. He hadn't asked for a resignation. He hadn't needed one. But when institutions fail quietly, sometimes it takes the quiet ones to remind them how loudly truth echoes. It went up on a Tuesday morning, no announcement, no warning. Just a fresh aluminum sign bolted cleanly into the edge of the mailbox post, angled slightly toward the street, so even those passing quickly on their bikes couldn't miss it. Letters were bold, all caps, in deep black against reflective yellow. It read, K9, on duty, retired, but ready. There was no image, no cartoon dog, no flames or slogans. Just the words, and beneath them, a government-issued seal indicating prior military certification. It looked official because it was. The kind of sign not bought from a hardware store but issued years ago, long before Shadow's last overseas deployment. Vincent had stored it in a footlocker wrapped in canvas, alongside a flag and 2 commendation letters he never hung on his wall. He didn't say much about the sign, didn't tell anyone it was going up. He simply measured, drilled, wiped down the post, and hung it as if it had always been there. When a pair of 6th graders on scooters came rolling down the street around noon, they slowed without prompting. One nudged the other and pointed. Neither laughed. They steered quietly onto the other sidewalk. By sunset, the sign had become a kind of landmark. Vincent still took his 5:45 a.m. walks. Same pace, same loop. Shadow stayed close, never lunging, never barking, but alert in a way that didn't need translation. Older residents began nodding more readily when they passed. Teenagers, even those who had nothing to do with the earlier harassment, now kept to the far side of the path, not out of fear but something close to respect, edged with guilt. At the diner on Main, Mrs. Parson mentioned the sign to her friend and referred to it as a reminder, not a warning. Across town, the mayor quietly approved a maintenance request to repaint the crosswalk near Vincent's lot. Even though it hadn't been requested, a few boys from the local high school started jogging past the trailer in the early evening. They didn't speak, but one of them, wearing a Letterman jacket, stopped once at the curve in the gravel and raised his hand in a small, awkward salute. Vincent didn't return it, but he saw it. Later, someone left a bag of dog treats at the base of the mailbox. No note, just sealed, unopened, a ribbon tied loosely around the middle. Shadow sniffed it once, then looked up to Vincent, as if waiting. For permission, he let her take it. No new attacks came. Whatever cycle had started with a handful of eggs had broken. Not just because of exposure or discipline, but because something more subtle had shifted. The silence was different now. Not avoidance, not apathy, but acknowledgement. And the sign remained. Untouched, Vincent didn't put up cameras to protect it. He didn't need to. Those who passed by now understood something most of them hadn't before, that protection wasn't always loud, wasn't always obvious, and wasn't always temporary. Some learned that safety can be quiet, that honor can sit at the edge of town in an aluminum trailer with one old soldier and his dog. That not all guardians wear badges or carry clipboards. Sometimes they simply walk their perimeter at dawn, drink their coffee black, and keep to themselves until someone makes the mistake of testing the silence. That evening, just before the sky dipped to violet, Shadow sat on the porch, her ears flicking at the sound of wind and distant voices. Vincent sat beside her, one boot crossed over the other, not reading, not writing, just watching. The sign caught the last bit of daylight, glinted, then settled back into stillness. The mornings in Maple Hollow always began the same. A soft mist rising from the ditch grass, dew settling on the gravel just enough to darken its edges. The sun never hurried over the ridge, always took its time, and Vincent never rushed. And Shadow stepped out just before it rose, habit, not obligation. His boots made the same steady sound as they met the ground. Shadow trotted beside him, a little slower these days, but just as deliberate. Her steps were tight, precise. Even in her older age, her gait had the control of training deeply embedded, like a soldier who no longer marched, but still remembered the rhythm. She didn't growl anymore, not since the incident quieted. Not since the boys stopped riding their bikes past with smirks, or since the trash and eggs stopped appearing like clockwork. But her head still turned at distant sounds, the low hum of a car engine starting to early, the metallic click of a gate half a block away. The creak of a screen door opening behind them, routine, harmless, but still worth noting. Vincent noticed it too. The way her ears shifted at small movements, how her shoulders tensed when a runner approached, just until she identified the gait and rhythm. She always relaxed in time, but her instincts never fully shut off. They had been sharpened over many deployments, too many night patrols, too many rooms entered with only seconds to assess. Their loop took them past the same landmarks, past the telephone pole with the cracked number tag, past the overgrown lot where a barn once stood, past the fire hydrant that always leaked just a little near the base. It was a world that hadn't changed much in years, but Shadow still treated every walk as new territory to monitor. She paused at corners, waited for his signal, never broke ahead. If she saw a squirrel, she would glance at Vincent first, as if to ask if it was her business. He would nod or keep walking, and she would respond accordingly. It was routine, but never mindless. Sometimes, Vincent wondered what she was really scanning for. Not just danger, not just motion, but something deeper, an echo of something she once had to do. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was purpose. Maybe she still expected something to show up one day. Something from a past she couldn't name, only feel. The kind of threat that didn't announce itself with eggs or firecrackers, but moved quietly, like smoke through a window before anyone smelled it. Back home, he brewed his coffee. She sat near the doorknot, blocking it, just posted watching. She never whined, never barked, unless instructed. But her gaze would flick to the mailbox at 8 o'clock, to the sidewalk at 8:05, to the trash truck at 8:12. Always clocked. One afternoon, a teenager walked by and paused at the new sign. He didn't laugh or linger, just looked for a long moment, then kept moving. Shadow didn't stand, didn't react, but Vincent saw her eyes follow the boy until he disappeared down the curve. She still watched, not because she feared something would happen, but because she understood that something already had. And once that happens, part of you never fully relaxes. It wasn't about paranoia, it was about preparedness. When they sat on the porch in the evenings, Vincent would sometimes speak not full conversations, just quiet thoughts. Good perimeter. Today, he'd say, or you caught that before I did. And she would glance at him, then back to the field. Shadow didn't need commands anymore. She just needed space, time, and a partner who understood silence. Vincent knew that one day, maybe not far off, her legs wouldn't carry her the full loop. But until that day came, she would keep walking it, because watching wasn't just what she did, it was how she remembered. And in the quiet space between sunup and full daylight, Vincent let her lead just one step ahead. Eyes open, always scanning,